There's a moment that happens quietly in some people's lives. Not a dramatic argument. Not a big betrayal. Just a slow realization that certain conversations leave them drained in a way they can't easily explain. That after spending time with certain people, something inside them feels tense, like their mind never really relaxed the entire time. So they begin to step back. At first it's small. They reply less often. They cancel plans more easily. They take longer to return messages. And eventually, without making a big announcement, entire connections disappear from their lives. From the outside, it can look cold. People sometimes say things like, they just cut everyone off, or they're impossible to stay close to. But what often gets missed is that for many of these people, the decision doesn't feel sudden at all. It feels like the end of a very long internal process that nobody else saw happening. And in a culture that values constant connection, this behavior is often misunderstood. We're taught that healthy people maintain relationships, tolerate differences, and keep communication open. So when someone quietly removes themselves from friendships, family dynamics, or social circles, the assumption is usually that they're being avoidant, selfish, or emotionally immature. But human behavior is rarely that simple. There's a particular psychological pattern that shows up in people who repeatedly cut others out of their lives. And it's not usually about arrogance or indifference. More often, it's about protection. The psychology of people who cut everyone off is deeply tied to how their nervous system learned to manage emotional safety. Over the past 2 decades, researchers studying emotional regulation and attachment have noticed something interesting. People don't just develop habits around relationships, they develop physiological responses to them. The brain becomes trained to predict whether closeness leads to comfort or stress. For some people, relationships are where they feel most grounded. Connection lowers their stress levels, and being around others helps regulate their emotions. But for others, the pattern develops differently. When someone grows up in environments where closeness often came with criticism, unpredictability, or emotional pressure, the brain begins associating relationships with vigilance rather than safety. In simple terms, their nervous system learns that being around people requires constant monitoring. Reading tone. Watching expressions. Anticipating reactions. Even when nothing obvious is wrong, their mind stays slightly on guard. Over time, that kind of quiet vigilance becomes exhausting. Not in a dramatic way. Just a low-level tension that never fully turns off. And when that tension builds long enough, the brain starts looking for relief. For some people, that relief shows up as distance. Stepping away from relationships becomes less about rejecting others and more about finally letting the nervous system rest. Psychologists sometimes describe this pattern as an adaptive strategy rather than a personality trait. In other words, the behavior wasn't originally chosen because it felt good. It was learned because it worked. At some point in life, creating distance reduced stress more effectively than trying to fix the relationship. So the brain remembered that solution. And once a strategy proves reliable, the mind tends to reuse it. This is why people who cut others off often don't feel dramatic while doing it. From the outside it may look like a harsh decision, but internally it can feel surprisingly calm, almost like closing a door that had been quietly rattling for years. The important thing to understand is that this pattern doesn't make someone stronger or weaker than anyone else. Different people develop different ways of maintaining emotional stability. Some people move closer when relationships feel difficult. Others step back. Neither response is inherently more mature. They're simply different nervous system strategies. But there's another layer to this behavior that most people don't notice. Many individuals who cut people off are actually highly sensitive to relational dynamics. They notice shifts in tone that others ignore. They pick up on subtle dismissiveness. They detect emotional patterns early. Because of that awareness, they often spend a long time trying to tolerate things before they ever create distance. Which is why the moment they finally withdraw can feel abrupt to everyone else. What looks like a sudden decision is often the result of months, or even years, of quiet internal calculation. There's also a paradox hidden inside this pattern. The same awareness that helps someone recognize unhealthy dynamics can also make relationships feel heavier than they do for most people. When you're constantly analyzing emotional undercurrents, interactions stop being simple. Small moments carry more meaning. Subtle behaviors feel more significant. And eventually, the mental load of tracking all of it becomes overwhelming. So the mind simplifies the situation the only way it knows how. It removes the relationship entirely. This doesn't always come without cost. People who cut others off often gain peace, but they sometimes lose complexity too. Relationships that might have evolved differently are never given that chance. Connections that contain both tension and care disappear together. And sometimes, after the silence settles, there's a quiet question that lingers beneath the surface. Not regret exactly. Just curiosity about what might have happened if things had unfolded differently. But that's the trade-off most survival strategies carry. They protect something important, while also limiting something else. Because when someone removes themselves from many relationships, it isn't necessarily a sign that they don't value people. In many cases, it's the opposite. It's a sign that they value emotional stability so deeply that they're unwilling to keep participating in dynamics that disturb it. Their nervous system has simply learned that distance is sometimes the safest form of regulation. And once a mind learns where calm exists, it naturally moves toward it. None of this means the person is broken. It means their experience is shaped a particular way of maintaining equilibrium. Human beings adapt in countless ways, often without realizing it. Some learn to repair relationships repeatedly. Others learn to walk away quietly. Both are attempts to preserve a sense of inner balance. And if you happen to recognize yourself in this pattern, the slow distancing, the quiet exits, the sense that certain relationships require more emotional energy than they give back, it doesn't automatically mean something is wrong with the way you operate. It may simply mean your mind became very skilled at detecting when peace was no longer present. The deeper question isn't whether that instinct exists. It's how it developed, and what it might be trying to protect. Because often, beneath behaviors that look distant from the outside, there's a story about emotional survival that most people never see. And once you start noticing those hidden patterns, you begin to realize something interesting about yourself. The way you relate to people may say less about who you are, and more about what your mind learned, long before you ever had the language to explain it. And that's a realization many people never fully explore. But if this way of seeing yourself felt familiar, there are other patterns in human psychology that tend to sit right beside it, patterns that quietly shape how certain people move through the world, often without anyone noticing at all.